Dragon Age Veilguard. From an impressive shower of praise during the previews to half of Bioware staff being laid off, including the director of the game quote-unquote leaving, there is no doubt that this game was a very significant landmark in the gaming space. It was a symbol of a sort, whose performance would undoubtedly influence the future of the industry. If the game had been a total success, there would have been a score of people taking that as an example that the kind of contemporary divisive politics injected not just into the game but also into the studio culture that obviously impacted every aspect of this game are things that the industry needs more of, things that would spell success, alongside somewhat of a disregard towards more deeper and complex RPG mechanics, writing, and player choice. Instead, with the flop it is the opposite, and I think that we've already seen a little bit of its effects with Avowed, for example, where if you recall back to December and the whole drama with Matt Hansen losing his mind on social media telling people that he's making a purposefully divisive game with the aim of neglecting fans that have a certain political leaning, at one point he said that the pronoun display in-game was purposeful, and he couldn't wait until Grums and Elon Musk saw the default, and certainly everyone else who thinks that this is a total joke, even if they're not fans of either Grums or Elon and are simply people who want to enjoy video games without any of this stuff shoved in there, especially fantasy games where this kind of element is beyond unfitting and sticks out like a sore thumb. Now, with people finally getting their hands on Avowed's 5-day early access version, it's been revealed that the pronouns have been relegated into a settings option that you have to go out of your way to enable. So while it is still in there, it is certainly not the default anymore that Matt Hansen was proudly puffing his beta chest about, unless of course this is only a setting for now for the early access in order to avoid pre-release backlash and is then patched into the game by default on day one. I guess we'll see. One way or another, a resounding success with Dragon Age Veilguard, a game that put so much emphasis into these elements of its identity, would have certainly shifted the narrative and emboldened other titles like Avowed to be more overt with the kind of content that is in it. And of course, who knows how many other video games are out there right now being made that are scaling back on some of these elements after taking the aftermath of Veilguard as a lesson that this is not wanted, it was merely tolerated, and people took that tolerance and wore it very, very thin, time after time, and now that tolerance is at an all-time low. The gaming community at large may be quite divided when it comes to certain elements in video games and how they are handled, as well as to this metaphorical or imaginary split in our heads in regards to what exactly makes a game quote-unquote a woke failure and what exactly makes a game still redeemable, playable, or even enjoyable despite what one would consider a woke element. A game like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 shows that, but if there's one thing that unites us all quite strongly, it is our clear distaste for the fruits of activism in the games industry, the fruits of overt, trashy, immersion-breaking, and quality-sacrificing ideological garbage, of which Dragon Age Veilguard was filled with.
Tosh, do you like being a woman?
Nobody likes being a woman.
In the end, this is the legacy that this game is leaving behind. It is what it will be mainly remembered for, as well as the destruction of the Dragon Age franchise and the story and lore that had been building up throughout the games. It's a sad legacy to have, but one that is fully deserved and earned all on its own, regardless of what shills and game journalists in the media will always try to tell you. One of the biggest issues with the discourse surrounding this game has been the media manipulation. Even before launch, this was already being touted as an upcoming game of the year, something revolutionary that would impress us all, that would both end the story of the Dreadwolf in a satisfying way, but also pave the road for a bright future for Bioware and the Dragon Age franchise. Speaking ill of this game's trailers was something that was very poorly regarded in online communities, especially the ones dedicated to Dragon Age. If you'll recall, there was even one of them that banned people just for doing haha reactions on posts. Communities that like to bury their hands in the sand and claim to only want to focus on the positive aspects of gaming. Anytime a Veilguard post came up, it was a problem, and more often than not, those posts ended up with comment sections locked, and this is because people were already dunking on the art style and the obnoxious color schemes, and that's not to mention the character designs themselves. Tash was already being mocked before it was even revealed that she had that non-binary scene. I can understand wanting to keep a community positive. I used to be an admin of a fairly fairly sized gaming community for a few years, and whenever there was drama or controversy, it exhausted all of us in the staff. Worse yet, we didn't even make money out of it, so we were basically just screwing up our whole days for nothing. But one thing that can't be ignored in these cases is the fact that this stuff enforces toxic positivity, and toxic positivity in these communities create two things. One, it makes people feel somewhat disenfranchised, makes them feel like they're nasty for having a particularly negative opinion of a game. This is usually even pumped up by ridiculous claims from unhinged people that if you dislike a certain game or have a certain issue, you are either sexist or racist or some kind of phobic. And then this leads to people being even more disconnected from one another. It makes them generate these sort of like personal vendettas against these games because of having been mistreated or cast out by their communities over what is often a simple difference of opinion. This is what has been going on for years now. It's an undeniable aspect of why gaming discourse has become so toxic and bitter. And the other thing it creates is this comfort zone for mediocrity, which reaches all the way to the top, affecting the studios and the work that they're doing on the games. This soft culture breeds such an aversion to accountability and reality that it outright ruins studios. You can quite literally see the decline in quality in these games over the years. Once upon a time, not even that long ago, we were already seeing this in a mechanical way, where we would notice that there's been this sort of trade done by many studios where they stopped working on making detailed worlds with a lot of interactivity, player agency, and mechanical depth, and instead focused on making the crispiest looking visuals possible, the best looking and moving water possible, the most gorgeously striking vistas and skyboxes, and the most realistic lighting. But if you look around now, even the visual aspect has been falling off, where we're looking back to older games like Batman Arkham Knight, Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption 2, Metro Exodus, even some Ubisoft stuff like Assassin's Creed Unity and Syndicate, despite a few blemishes in some dated details like in character models. These are games that look better than a lot of what has been releasing recently, often from the same studios or studios that are comparable in terms of size and budget. These two are the fruits of this toxic positivity within the industry, a sad hyperfixation on wanting something to succeed not because it's good but because it plays to an ideological goal, and this toxic positivity perpetuated all the way until the very launch of Veilguard. If you recall, Bioware filtered the reviews that would be made public in regards to this game by inviting an already filtered list of creators and media to do their previews. Then they filtered those people by not sending review codes to the ones that had negative opinions in their previews, such as Fextra Life. This resulted in a mass of glowing reviews right before launch, a total glaze of 9s and 10s talking about how this game was the very best of Bioware, or at the very least a return to form. If you'll recall IGN's quote with their source, you might even have a little laugh, as it said that even if we never get another Dragon Age, at least it got to go out on a high note with Veilguard, which is hilarious because if this was truly a game where these review scores spoke the truth, truly a game of the year banger worthy of 9s and 10s, then not even an earthquake would stop EA from pumping out a sequel immediately. Only 2 reviews stood out by going against the grain, one from SkillUp and one from Mr. Matty Plays, both of which were disappointed with the game, and their frustration was visible, especially through Mr. Matty Plays. It's like this dude couldn't freely express himself because of having the status that he had, so he was just sounding and looking depressed and exasperated while merely sticking to expressing disappointment. None of this really mattered to the shills, of course. This to them was fake news, and then once discovering that it was Mr. Matty Plays footage that was leaked out through one of his editors or whatever it was, they went all in on disregarding these negative reviews and even attacking him, which is another thing that I found very comical because the leaked footage wasn't showing any spoilers or anything, it was simply showing cringe and terrible writing, so basically they were merely upset that the game had gotten exposed by having that come out ahead of time, instead of being upset at the game featuring shitty writing in the first place. It's like, how could you show this bad thing about the game? How could you? This needs to sell. I need this to sell, you son of a... This brand of Copium went on and on and on even after launch, with even some big game journalists of note embarrassing themselves, like Jason Schreier, who made tweets claiming that the game was topping the charts with a mere 89,000 concurrent players that started to drop very quickly for a game in a massive and recognizable AAA RPG franchise. He also embarrassed himself by tweeting that he doesn't even like the game, he just likes to see the chuds losing. Losing what? I still don't know, he hasn't updated people on what he meant. Right now he's very busy praising Avowed in the same fashion. Let's see if it goes down better this time around. Fingers crossed for the homie. Journalists kept doing their thing, telling people that Veilguard was actually amazing and all the naysayers were just transphobic on account of the director being trans and the most notable character that kept being laughed at online being non-binary. Meanwhile, there were no shortage of reasons as to why that character was laughed at. The truth is that the criticism towards the trans director was more than deserved because she made it all about her being trans. Even in her developer diary section, where she was supposed to talk about Dragon Age as a video game franchise, all she talks about is being fucking transgender and other identity politics and how Dragon Age is supposed to be all about that. So you're basically taking a franchise, narcissistically appropriating it and making it all about you, then the game flops, the evidence as to what caused it is right there in plain view, not even just in plain view but with arrows pointing to it, like with Corinne Bush holding the fucking, you know, like those guys in the airport that wave their little thing so that the airplanes know where to land. That was Corinne Bush pointing at herself like, hey, yes, I'm trans, and as you can see in my developer diary, I appropriated the Dragon Age franchise to tout my identity politics nonsense and put it in the game. And then people are transphobic for just acknowledging that. And the truth about Tosh is that it was just one of the most cringy and out of place characters in the history of gaming. Tosh was such a staggering phenomenon of tone deafness and an Olympic level lack of self-awareness that the very thing that the character was written to represent and normalize was done damage to by how terribly annoying and straight up unhinged the character and the themes surrounding her development was. Seriously, if not for the photos and posts from the writers and the aforementioned developer diary from Corinne Bush, I would have said that this character was made to be terrible on purpose as a psyop to make non-binary people look like shit. That's how bad this was. If you're all interested in diving deeper into this topic, then please feel free to check out my character deep dive of Tosh. I'll have a link down in the description and on the top comment. In that video we go over the character's inconsistencies, the terrible examples of writing, how weak and pointless her character arc was, and we go over the ideological aspect of it as well to show just how poorly executed it was. And by the way, if you are a recurring viewer who watched the final part of my review, the Autopsy of a Disaster video, and were asking for me to go ahead and do the same for the other companions and their character arcs and personal quest lines, then I'm just leaving it here as a quick announcement that I am going to go ahead and do it. I don't know when it'll be ready yet, but you can definitely expect it. Anyway, back to the video. Later on in December, a big old article was written centered on an interview with Corinne Bush, the director of the game. I have a full video going over that article as well. I'll leave a link in the description and top comment if you're interested in a full breakdown with a lot of roasting. In short though, the article was a massive cope fest in which the interviewer and the interviewee completely discarded any responsibility at all for the game's poor performance. While they somewhat acknowledge the weak sales, they blame it all completely on this imaginary, targeted hate campaign that the game apparently received, and that's why the game wasn't regarded as a true success, that the team knew it to be internally and would continue building upon. Thinking back now, the article is actually so incredibly fucking hilarious given the fact that a mere month after that, Corinne Bush suddenly leaves Bioware. Totally on her own, guys, trust me. And then a mere few days after that, it is announced that the entire Veilguard writing team got yeeted out of the studio as well. In general, Bioware went through a big round of layoffs, reducing the studio staff down to around 100 people or less, a move that saddens a lot of people, but that honestly makes me pretty glad to see. While less hands on deck can mean less work done less quickly, it also means less intrusion, less politics, less uselessness, and hopefully a tighter, more efficient and more focused environment, so long as they got rid of the right people to get rid of and kept the talent. Last but not least, as of now, the last bit of news in regards to Veilguard is that Andrew Wilson, the big head honcho at EA came out and addressed the failure, claiming Veilguard fell short of EA's expectations by half, only managing to get about 1.5 million players out of the expected 3 million. Worth noting that he used the word players and not sales, indicating that this game didn't even manage to break that much in sales. Having several players from subscriptions and /or other crap implies non-sales. Like for example, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was some kind of promotion going on where if you bought a certain graphics card, it would come with a copy of Veilguard, which was yet another thing that was mocked at the time because it came across as a company desperately trying to move copies before launch to increase their pre-orders and sales. And this wasn't like a Cyberpunk 2077 type of case where a special version of a graphics card was being made in a Cyberpunk edition. It was just, hey fellas, would you please take this game with your graphics card as well, please? So anyway, besides the player numbers, Andrew Wilson completely failed to address the true issue at the core of Veilguard's failure and instead decided to cope and lie that the failure was due to not focusing on live service elements.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
What are you, Down syndrome?
Because of course, the thing that a game that nobody wants to fucking play needs the most is live service garbage like microtransactions, loot boxes, battle passes, e-stores with cosmetic garbage, purchasable only through special currency, etc. This is obviously the only thing that could have saved Dragon Age Veilguard. In a game where its own writing, its own characters, its own story, its own visuals are roadblocks for the player to enjoy himself, what you need are more fucking roadblocks. In the form of predatory monetization and always online content. Not better writing, not a complete detachment from overt, disgustingly intrusive, politically charged modern day-isms, not better gameplay, not better role-playing, mechanics, nope, none of that shit. The only mistake that they made was to not put up even more trash, blocking the player progression and satisfaction in a game that was already fucking barren of players to begin with. Now, whether this is just a retarded lie to feed his investors to see if they're stupid enough to bite and get EA to go back to bet on predatory monetization as they did throughout the entire last console generation, or a cover-up lie to not publicly lay blame on the DEI elements that are quite literally the only thing in hopes of bringing him some money in return via ESG grants, who the fuck knows. All I know is it's total bullshit. Meanwhile, shills who are still coping endlessly in support of a failed game that they absolutely refuse to acknowledge as a failure took advantage of Andrew Wilson's statement to pin the blame on corporate greed. It's always funny to me how these people will always defend corporations when they are being pandered to, and only when they stop being pandered to do they remember that these corporations are corporations. Now it's apparently EA's fault for wanting too much out of Veilguard in terms of sales. It's their fault for expecting that a fucking game in the Dragon Age franchise would at the very least sell 3 million copies or reach 3 million players in the space of 3 months, give or take, which is a completely delusional take. EA was actually being quite tame with the expected 3 million sales. It's not an exaggerated number at all. Now, granted, this doesn't mean that if Veilguard had hit 3 million, EA wouldn't still be saying that it underperformed, since this is usually how it goes with some companies. We can take a look at Square Enix, for example. Final Fantasy XVI was regarded as a game that undersold despite shifting 3 million copies in its first week, not only showing that the 3 million number for Veilguard, a multi-platform game, was not at all unexpected, but also that, of course, with these companies the word enough is never really enough anyway. One way or another though, the shills are crashing out desperately looking for shit to pin the blame on with god-awful arguments. One of my personal favorite small little lower budget games is Vampire, a game published by Focus Entertainment way back in 2018 already and developed by a relatively lesser known studio, especially back then, Don't Nod. Even this fucking game managed to sell 1 million copies, and it was a new IP. Dragon Age Veilguard really had no excuse for its underperformance, especially given the fact that it released in a golden release window. Companies would kill for the release conditions that Veilguard had. This game was all alone in October, one of the best-selling times of the year, and its competition featured no big blockbusters, with the only game that could have thrown a wrench into its sales performance performance being Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was delayed to February. October just had a few remasters and a few expansions to other games like Diablo 4 and Alan Wake 2, a bunch of stuff whose names I can't even recognize anymore, a Sonic and a Dragon Ball game, dope games, but still just Sonic and Dragon Ball, nothing major, nothing in the AAA blockbuster market, except for the usual Call of Duty shit that every October or November has to deal with. And speaking of November, the only thing of note in November is Stalker 2: The Heart of Chernobyl on the 20th, so there's plenty of time in between as well. There truly was no reason whatsoever for Veilguard not to succeed after having quite literally like 4 to 5 weeks of nothing in its level to compete against. October is usually known as Broketober for a reason. Companies love these fall release dates for big titles, and somehow, even with the stars aligning for Veilguard and giving it a perfect fucking launch point, it still ended up an utter embarrassment. It's stuff like this that would make me hand over my shield card, honestly. Even if I cared about this game, like even if I cared, I could not even try to die on a hill defending it. At this point, just take the damn hill, take everything and leave me alone with my tears. Now, if the release date wasn't enough already to put into perspective how badly this game failed, let's talk about other aspects of it. Because flops don't always mean that a game is bad. Sometimes a game flops simply because too much lines up against it, and it results in a soft launch or a poor launch. You know, sometimes games release in poor states and they need to be fixed. Doesn't mean that the game is bad, it means that the game was sadly not optimized properly before releasing. Some other times, games just release in the middle of so many other huge competitors that there's simply not enough sales to go around. A game that always comes to mind in regards to this, and one that I obviously love playing, as is obvious from how often I use footage of it, is Jedi Survivor. Jedi Fallen Order, its predecessor, was a huge surprise for me, and I would say for many others as well. Nobody was really expecting that game to even happen, let alone for it to be good. We had been screwed over by EA so many times, and the fact that Star Wars as a franchise was utterly cursed in the games department because of it being exclusive to EA, who were exclusively making live services instead of single-player games, we were just not expecting anything like this at all. Suddenly, Fallen Order appears, a single-player action-adventure game with a bit of a Souls-light twist, and that you could play from beginning to end without any mediocre open-world bloat, no microtransactions, no loot boxes or e-stores with cosmetics. I genuinely could not believe my eyes. Now, of course, the game isn't perfect, there's complaints here and there's a whole side of the fan base that hates the game because the lightsabers don't instantly kill enemies, but for me this isn't a big deal. If the game is good and a consequence of its balancing comes in the form of enemies not being instantly killable with a touch from a lightsaber, then I'm good. I would like to see one day lightsaber combat perfectly integrated in the game with an original combat system that takes this into account, but for now I'm not going to cross off a fantastic game because of this one detail. Regardless of this stuff though, the game was received excellently, even praised by the wider Star Wars community, with a lot of people praising the storytelling in the game over the years being better than the slop being pumped out by Disney's shows. So everything should have been paving the way for a super strong launch with Jedi Survivor. Hell, not even just a strong launch, but a striking game that should have marked the year of release, 2023. But instead, thanks to a lot of performance issues and bugs and a frankly broken PC launch, this game had a pretty uneventful launch. It managed to beat Fallen Order's launch numbers, but apparently not by a lot. And despite the developers' hard work trying to fix the game, which they did do an excellent job of, at least on console, I can't speak as to the PC version since I don't play it on there, it just didn't account by much. Because you know how it is, people have a tendency to move on to whatever else is new and they only ever pay attention to something that they missed if it goes on sale, or if someone reminds them of it, or for example, nothing good or striking is currently out, you know, like Veilguard during last year's Broketober weeks. It's a heartbreaking case of a fantastic game being kind of regarded as a flop by some people because of it not living up up to the standards of a Star Wars launch. And not to sidetrack too much here, but it's an IP that I'm very worried about now. There's no telling how much interference will now go into its sequel, or if the sequel and finale to this trilogy is even going to happen at all, given the fact that so many games with potential get outright cancelled these days because of the wall that these companies have backed themselves into with terrible decision making. Basically, you make a flop like Veilguard and it's going to affect everything else that your company is working on. But when it comes to Dragon Age Veilguard, nothing really stood in its way either. Beautiful, clear launchpad aside, this game was also pretty well optimized and free of bugs at launch. Obviously there's always something, I mean, welcome to the video games experience, but it was a very smooth launch. And I just wanted to bring this to attention because it's just another little narrative that some shills like to grab onto. Anything and everything to try and justify that the game is actually amazing and really good, and all the work put into it is objectively good, and its failure is completely due to biased shitheads and coordinated hate campaigns or coincidental things that just kind of made it undersell. And it's all bullshit, folks. Never let yourselves be fooled. This game's failure is owed to its utter and complete mediocrity. The mediocrity of its worth as an RPG with no role-playing elements to be seen, the unending repetitiveness of its basic combat, the weakness of its writing and storytelling, the shallowness of its world building, and the pure dog shit of its quest design and plot progression. And of course, all of the ideologically influenced elements being sprinkled into everything, with the heavy radioactive doses of it injected into characters like Tash, and smaller little pieces of it littering other aspects of its DNA like the world building and presentation, both of which I go into detail in my two-part review, the first one done halfway through the game and the other done after completing it. I say don't forget this because the narrative is always going to be flipped around. On one hand, the shills will never let go of the cope, and on the other, the media will do one of two things. Either they'll suddenly pretend like they never thought Veilguard was that good anyway, already visible through promotional stuff for Avowed. For example, PC Gamer was using Veilguard as a flawed game to prop up Avowed, despite having given Veilguard a 79 out of 100, with highly encouraging praise. Now suddenly it's like, oh, actually, now that I think of it, while I play Avowed, I see the flaws from Veilguard, which is always funny to see. Or they're going to reinforce these beliefs for the shills that the game was sabotaged and blah 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 blah, because good luck if you ever expect the game's media to be genuine and actually call out the truth of the matter. Good luck ever expecting them to say something like, for example, that maybe appointing a person who worked on Sims games for a decade to be the director of an important sequel in a AAA dark fantasy RPG franchise is not such a good idea. Good luck ever expecting them to question the writing, the decisions, or the very basic thing that is nearly unanimously agreed upon, that characters like Tash and subjects such as her gender identity don't fit in the Dragon Age franchise, don't fit into medieval fantasy RPGs in general. In fact, instead of that, they are more liable to tell us the opposite, that it absolutely does fit into the Dragon Age franchise. In fact, it belongs in it, simply because of the game having had gay romance options for players to engage in back then, and one realistically depicted trans character in Inquisition, at least as realistic as they could have done, with integrated lore in regards to blood magic, a character that was way in the background that you didn't even have to speak to. The fuck does this have anything to do with it? Fuck if I know. Should Elder Scrolls 6 feature trans people and trans flags as well, just because you, as the Dragonborn, could marry anyone that you wanted to, regardless of their gender, in Skyrim? Honestly, arguments like these are precisely what make situations like the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 being a minefield for video game discourse. It's because some people are willing to look back to older games, find a gay character, and now push the fucking envelope to make that game have a necessity to be some kind of symbol for diversity, inclusion, and representation. A game that is now required to push LGBTQ+ as propaganda rather than it used to be way in the past, which was a simple video game that included a normal and perfectly acceptable instance of player choice to pick whoever they wanted for a romance path. In other words, arguments like these quite literally prove that the slippery slope is not a fallacy, but an actual real thing, because we have people going back to an example of something that should just be seen as a normal, no big deal kind of thing, like a same-sex option for a romance or a marriage in a video game, and wanting to view it as a political thing, wanting to make it a political statement in relation to current day bullshit that was not even happening back then, wanting to appropriate these elements of games and franchises that had them as fucking foot soldiers of their ideology, foot soldiers that have to keep marching on. So forget about just having a same-sex romance option in a game. Next up, we have to put in a trans person, even if they don't fit. In fact, let's make them not fit on purpose so that they're perfectly in sight as a statement. Hell, forget about doing it in a side character, let's put that onto the player themselves, and let's grab something that's even more unrelatable, even more unlikely, and even more challenging to fit into a fucking medieval fantasy franchise, such as a non-binary person, and then let's force everyone around them to talk to them and use their preferred pronouns and lecture them when they don't. I hate seeing these arguments that take these older games and pretend as if they exist as flags of support for their current day shit, when back then there was none of this madness going on now with dozens of genders, the erasure of the terms male and female, the deeply problematic and even despicable matter of child transitioning, the madness of legitimizing self-identification, etc. I may not have been an adult back then, fully synced into all of this stuff, current politics and all that, but I didn't need to be in order to know that this was not how the world fucking was. Therefore, these games don't stand as symbols that support the current day shit. They are being appropriated and scaled up, basically, know what I mean? They are quite literally being slippery sloped, where people like this person here, for example, who left a comment on a video of mine in regards to Veilguard, believe that just because a game had something normal back then that is nowadays considered a progressive political token, then that means that the entire franchise must now dedicate a chunk of itself to represent their political ideology. This is why it's going to be so challenging for games to get back to a normal, sane middle ground where they can again feature random normal stuff like a gay character or whatever without it looking like someone is trying to brute force a sliver of ideology to serve as a foundation for pushing the envelope in a future game with the same arguments that unhinged activists within Bioware itself used back in October, saying that it was always there, you fucking tourist. These people's minds are cooked. They belong in the world of politics. They belong in some fucking parliament, not in game studios. Worse yet, though, is what happens with these ideologies and where they actually come from, why they are actually there, and the kind of damage that they do to a brand, not even just by what is put into the games in their name, but by the kind of people that it attracts, the actual, image that it builds for itself with these people at the helm, and with the people that they choose to associate with. It's always been obvious that a big proponent of this stuff is money. If there wasn't any money at the end of the road, companies wouldn't have been chasing this rising trend that valued virtue signaling online through celebrities and shit. This soft culture of so-called love, kindness and tolerance and whatever the fuck else that somehow eventually had to lead to unhinged far-left nonsense, among other lovely things like acting like complete animals towards anyone who dared to have a different kind of opinion or view, basically extremism, harkening back to what was mentioned a bit ago on a previous topic in regards to this toxic environment, leading to censorship, cancel culture, groupthink, media manipulation, etc. The craziness went so far that we are at a point where companies want to force behaviors through whatever means they have currently available to them, such as using money to either reward those who comply or impact those who don't.
We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year. Now, what we're doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay?
We're doing the same thing.
And so you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted, and that's not just...
So during all this time, certain groups of people got really accustomed to this sort of environment, treatment, and even relationship with these companies who propped them up and catered to them at every turn, a little more each passing year, leading to situations, for example, like that Eddie Unified Walker, who somehow, with such a tiny following, scored an invitation to a Veilguard preview event and even got to meet and hang out with the director, and then also got early access to the game to review it. If you check in with Eddie now, there's two big things to take a sad note of. One of them is that Eddie's channel has barely grown. I honestly haven't even noticed it. First time I noticed was way back around the launch of the game, where Nure and him were having a little drama online. Eddie had around 10,000 subscribers, and now Eddie still has around 10,000 subscribers. Now, this isn't to slight a fellow content creator. After all, growing on YouTube is not easy, and he still has more subscribers than me. It requires work and also a big helping of luck. But it is to draw attention to the fact that this was obviously not a normal kind of situation where a company selects a content creator with a relatively solid following or just a relatively solid number of views on their videos in order to justify that partnership, for lack of a better word. Eddie didn't get his invite because of that, he got it because he's trans, and it actually just happened again with Avowed. Eddie was just hanging out on a random afternoon, some more drama came his way because he got on camera crying about feeling abandoned by Bioware, which we'll get into in a second, and naturally this blew up on other channels bigger than his, which drew in the attention of Xbox or Obsidian or whoever it was to offer Eddie early access to play Avowed. I am sure that Xbox and Obsidian are going to get a great return on that investment with Eddie's amazing viewership count and work ethic. A work ethic so inspiring that he only managed to finish Dragon Age Veilguard, the only game that his channel was focusing on, by December 31st. Big W's in the comment section for Eddie and Xbox, guys. Come on, let's give it up. So why was it that that video blew up, where he's all sad and depressed, looking like someone just pissed in his cereal? Well, yes, partly it's because it's funny, but the major part of it is that it was quite the I told you so kind of moment for a lot of people. These companies managed to bullshit a bunch of people into believing that they were ever in their thoughts, and that these matters that are deeply important for them, be that because of some screwed up result of an echo chamber brainwashing or because of actually legitimate mental illness related problems or whatever, are truly validated and given relevance and importance and genuine attention from these massive corporations. They genuinely don't understand how they've been getting used this entire time. They genuinely don't see how they've been getting duped, how they've been nothing but tokens to hide behind, or to use as a shield, or to use as a sword to push forward with whatever bullshit they were using them for that day. For example, the way that Disney goes hard on virtue signaling, using black people and queer people as a sword and a shield to defend their terrible work and to use the matter for clout and profit. It's literal usage too, it's not like a little coincidence. With Obi-Wan Kenobi show, for example, before it even premiered, Disney had already gone to the actress and warned her about how she should prepare to face racist comments from toxic Star Wars fans. And nobody in those circles even bothers to think critically about what just happened. Nobody bothers to think about all the characters played by black actors or actors of other ethnicities that don't get any hate. It's the same with sexism. It's another big thing that Disney uses to hide behind and to push forward their agenda with. If the show features an actress, its criticism is sexism. If it features a black actress, it's sexism and racism, and so on and so forth. You get what I'm saying here. Nobody ever bothers to look to the quality of the content. Nobody ever bothers to look to the myriad of pieces of media featuring actresses, people of color, and LGBT people that don't get hate because they are actually well made. It's almost as if this is about the quality of what's being made. It's almost as if these pieces of media fail because they suck, and the controversies rise online because the fucking morons in charge of these projects go out of their way to insult their fan bases with baseless, disgusting, inhumane insults and assumptions, and then they drag actors in along with them to get on their social media pages and post statements and videos condemning the so-called racism in the community, when all there is people roasting the shit out of their terrible shows and movies. These people have all been getting used like puppets. Nobody even bothers to look at what's right in front of their faces, where you have Disney virtue signaling about bigotry on Monday and then blurring or outright removing the faces of black actors or LGBT people from posters and advertisements of the same kind of stuff out in China and in the Middle East. This has been an ongoing bout of hypocrisy and pure, unadulterated manipulation of these people, and shills like Eddie and others choose to bury their heads in the sand and be used to make money by these companies, as they use them as swords and shields to protect their terrible content and as a puppet to push their ideology. Then, when the money isn't there anymore because of having taken this fucking grift so incredibly far that it has deeply damaged these pieces of media and franchises to the point of no return, they suddenly turn their backs on the grift. And then these morons sit there flabbergasted that the shit that they've been getting told over and over and over for years is now happening. And the same goes for the insiders. It's not just the shills that are getting played, because of course someone like Corinne Bush, for example, isn't in on the grift. I mean, they made their bag of money all the same, of course, but they're genuine about it. All those writers that ruined Dragon Age Veilguard, they are genuine about it. It's obvious that this industry has invited these activists into their midst because, well, there's two main reasons as I see it. Reason number one, it's easier to make it rather than to fake it. Why not get a real thing from real unhinged morons instead of getting normal directors, writers, etc. to fake it? And number two, DEI hiring, of course. The thing that replaces talent, ability, hard work, and the concept of minding your own business, keeping your politics to yourself, and doing your job with ideology and activism. That much of it is real, and this is why I don't like those takes from people like, for example, Andy Pence and others who look at the landscape of gaming as it is right now and drop all of their blame at the feet of the lower rung of studios, the developers, while worshipping the billionaires as supposed saviors. It's why I had to make a video in response to it, but it went largely unnoticed since, well, yeah, I'm still a very small creator, and at the time that I made the video, I think I only had around 2,000 subscribers, so I was basically a peanut. While it is true that a lot of these studios have been infested by activist hires, many of which reside in retarded departments that were created specifically for them, like these mutated human resource-like type of departments, or straight up internal DEI departments, like the 7 or more that Ubisoft has present in this picture right here, the truth is that it's those billionaires that put them there in the first place, and it's those billionaires that keep them there for as long as it remains profitable or viable in other ways that don't necessarily relate to money, by the way, to keep them there. But of course, it's also those same billionaires that allow an entire studio like Bioware to be reduced to less than 100 employees and abandon Veilguard to rot away with its piss-stinking legacy of being an utter failure of the viability of the woke mind virus for game development. Basically, it depends of which way the wind blows for these billionaires. If it's more profitable to fuck us, they'll do it, and if it's more profitable to suck us off, then they'll do it as well. Which is precisely what then results in our friend Eddie looking like a ghost just moonlighted him. While this stuff is easy to kind of sit back and celebrate from our side, I can't help but always urge people to not celebrate too soon. Always remember that things got as bad as they did because the people in charge of these companies didn't just allow it to happen, they straight up supported it to be so. And they will do it again in the future. In fact, it's not even a matter of it being in the future because a lot of this is still very much going on today. The truth is, Eddie may be sobbing that Bioware isn't his homie anymore since they dispatched all those woke-tard writers and sent their director packing to Wizards of the Coast, which is a place so rotten by ideology that even if you tried to restructure it, you wouldn't go anywhere. But EA is not down and out for the count, and the next Mass Effect may yet still be a game made with a lot of these ideological influences in mind. Influences which will make Eddie a happy boy again with another game to cover, at least until history repeats itself again. I don't like the way that this is. I don't like that people were taken advantage of to this degree. I don't necessarily feel pity for them, like I am pretty worn out when it comes to empathy for certain people, because a lot of these people have shown zero empathy towards others in return. Zero empathy, zero regard, zero tolerance, zero grace, zero fucking courtesy or decency of any kind towards anyone at all. The cancel culture showed that. Any dissenting opinion was enough for a cancellation. So what I feel is more so disgust for these companies companies for having gone down the route of disingenuously taking advantage of a thing, build it up, ruin it, all for money, and now discard it. The people I feel sorry for aren't the people who have been playing identity politics at the highest degree. It's the normal people who got caught in the middle. Normal gay and bi men and women, and even normal trans people too for that matter. Like I said before in one of my videos, I think it was the Tosh video, I have 2 trans friends who are literally just normal people you could walk by on the street or have a beer with and not even have a clue. And these normal people are people who got caught in the crossfire, who just wanted to quietly exist and live their lives, and instead they had their sexual orientation or their dysphoria, shit that they have zero control over, attached to a disgusting destructive movement that has quite literally chosen to antagonize everyone around it for the better part of the last decade. They were basically drafted to a war that they wanted no part in and had no chance of winning either, and in many cases a war that they fought on our side. There's even a lot of right-wing gay and even trans YouTubers who have been exposing the truth about all of this shit for normies that don't have any like trans friends or don't have any gay friends or don't understand some concepts because of the sheer lies that have been made up by left-wing propaganda. So there's a duality there where I don't feel sorry at all for the unhinged morons who played into all of this, but I despise these companies for their irresponsibility and for the fact that they aren't even going to face any repercussions. They'll just fire who they need to fire, restructure whatever they need to restructure, and then I dread to think about what is the next kind of thing that they're going to attach themselves onto in order to do the same thing that they just did for the past 10 years with identity politics. These are basically non-governmental structures that we did not vote for, trying to enforce political views and ideologies into society through money and other underhanded methods. And even though the culture shift has meant that some of these companies are now going to be pandering to us, quote unquote, I still don't like them and I still don't trust them. And this is why we need ideological activism out of gaming. I don't want to replace the lefty activists with righty activists like John De La Rose or John F. Trent, who have unhinged views and censorious inclinations all of their own. But anyway, I guess this last part here was just a bit of a vent on my part. In closing, here's the Dragon Age Veilguard, first and last of his name, keeper of pronouns, defender of the indefensible. While not the biggest financial failure in the history of gaming, as that spot is being kept very comfortably by Concord, it definitely is the biggest failure when it comes to this industry's attempt to shape itself into one where AAA games are meant to be politically charged slop feed for us to consume. Long may he reign. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider giving me a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe, as it really helps the channel grow and helps me to see what kind of content I should dedicate myself more onto here. Feel free to share any feedback or thoughts in the comments and have yourselves a great day. I'll see you guys on the next one.